how do you measure success? That's one of the biggest things we're seeing at the moment. The conversations are around how do you inform success? And I think that is a critical part of your data strategy. Have you got the right data in place to really inform measurement and attribution for your marketing investment?
I think when you have the multiple teams involved in the procurement of the technology, that always equates to something that will prove successful. If technology is forced upon you within an organisation, it always takes longer to adapt to it.
And those are the two things at the moment, both reputation and trust and price, that are key drivers of decision making.
Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 2 of the Marketing Now, Next and Future content series with Adverity and LinkedIn. The series is designed to discuss the biggest issues that marketeers are facing in the now, next and the future. My name is Mitesh Lakhani and I work as a Director of Solutions Consulting at Adverity, and I'm delighted to be joined by David Walsh.
Thank you very much indeed for inviting me along. I'm David Walsh. I'm Head of Customer Insights for EMEA and LATAM as part of LinkedIn Marketing Solutions.
So I'm going to start this conversation around culture and data, if that's okay, David. I very much think that we should look at the challenges that we're facing in the industry today. And when I think of the challenges, I think of time and the lack of time given to some of the data experiments that take place. Some of our independent research has shown that a third of marketeers are struggling to apportion their budget spend, and 40% of marketeers are also struggling with measuring ROI on that spend. They seem like side effects of not necessarily spending enough time with those data experiments, so they can't necessarily trust the data. The example is if we think about a campaign that's running in 5 areas or 5 channels or platforms or creatives, I think people are a little bit too hasty in the way that if a campaign isn't performing in one area as it should be in the first few days, budgets are shifted and lifted and put elsewhere. And I think that happens over the course of the year. And what I think I've seen is over the last 3 to 6, maybe even 12 months, has been that is repeated sort of quarter on quarter or campaign on campaign. And I think there's a lack of trust of that data. And I really do feel that if more time was given, that challenge could be alleviated and a more holistic data story could be told rather than retrofitting the data to the narrative that someone might have. But what are the challenges that you've seen?
I suppose one of the things I've seen is one of the challenges is alignment across different functions, different departments, different divisions within an organisation. And in B2B, particularly in the context of B2B, sales and marketing is a big challenge. So marketing and sales orchestration, we've demonstrated there's massive benefits in terms of driving efficiencies, in terms of driving top-line revenue growth, in terms of fundamentally increasing acquisition. And that's why, all the research we've got, it shows it's the number one priority for 2023. The challenge, what we're trying to do is get people to combine the efforts together in terms of delivering that, uniting the efforts to drive a more unified customer experience, I suppose, moving away from just acquisition to thinking about lifetime value. And I suppose it's about identifying the audience, reaching the audience, delivering valuable experiences across account-based marketing. And we've identified broadly 5 areas of challenge, all really addressed in part by data and insights. Kind of the first is a cultural alignment. People in sales and marketing are talking different languages. They've got different goals, different objectives, different KPIs. The second really is about alignment in terms of accounts. So thinking about the ideal customer profile, thinking about high propensity accounts they want to target collectively and ensuring there's a unification of who they want to talk to. The third is around really personalization. So how do they use data and insights to drive more effective personalized solutions to solve particular client needs and problems? The fourth is around availability of resource. And I think particularly in the current climate, do you have the resource to put the technology stack together that talks to each other? Do you have the resource to really understand the consumer needs and develop relevant content? And then the final is about measurement. I think having a unified view of framework for measurement so that you have a clear and consistent methodology in terms of how do you identify ROI. I suppose from your perspective, what do you see the biggest challenges around alignment within an organisation?
You've got different teams that have completely different goals that they need to achieve, and they're not necessarily always in sync with one another. That's sometimes a challenge. I've seen it in the agency world. I've seen it in my organisation at Adverity today as well. And aligning that is quite a challenge. The best way that I've seen it done is when you are singing off the same hymn sheet. And by that, I mean when the sales team and the sort of the pre-sales and the aftercare team are all kind of talking to one another as if they're a part of a larger pitch team in a way when you're considering accounts. And I think bringing teams together in as many situations as you can has always been the way that it's proved fruitful on the Adverity side of things, but even in the agency world. How do you guys work with different KPIs and aligning those between sales and marketing specifically?
I suppose within LinkedIn, when you think about our true north is always going to be revenue. Working with clients, I think it's, once again, I think it's critical to say, what is the shared goal? What are you trying to do? And I think, from your point about relationships and collaboration, it's interesting to see the most aligned clients have greater connections between people within the context of LinkedIn, which is obviously a microcosm of saying, okay, do they know each other? They've got relationships, and I think relationships are super important in terms of collaboration. I suppose from your perspective, what do you think the role is of technology in terms of driving that greater alignment?
I think when you have the multiple teams involved in the procurement of the technology, that always equates to something that will prove successful. If technology is forced upon you within an organisation, it always takes longer to adapt to it, and I think that's the key. If you've got buy-in from all areas on a piece of tech or a strategy or a mission statement, that's the way that it's really going to drive a positive change within an organisation. That's what we've seen at Adverity, for sure, over the last maybe 12 months or so.
How do you ensure they land credibly in the organisation to really inform future decisions?
I think it's a case of making sure that you filter that information correctly as far and wide as you can. So legacy KPIs and statistics still have a place because it's required to secure the budget for the next quarter or campaign. And I think organically, if we as an industry can inform everyone of our level and understanding to filter down the newer ways of looking at data. For example, engagement rate across certain platforms is seen as something that is sought after by a multitude of clients. However, if we can enable them to understand that the data goes beyond that, and this is what it actually really means across the industry, that's a way that you can not only get buy-in within your business, but you start educating people to adjust their way of thinking about how they're going to apportion the budget to their marketing campaign. When it comes to selecting the right technology, I think that one thing that's super important is working from the end goal and figuring out not necessarily what the technology is going to achieve, but what we actually want to achieve as an organisation, and then working backwards from that to maybe land on the missing piece of the jigsaw of the technology. But I also think that keeping the end user is really, really important. Often the person procuring the technology versus the person who's going to be using the technology are two different people or two different groups of people. And I think as long as they've got a harmonious relationship and you can come to kind of a compromise where both teams are a little bit happier with the end result of selecting that right technology, I think that's you're onto a good footing there. But when it comes to procuring that technology, how have you seen, both in your experience here at LinkedIn and prior to that, what are the patterns that you've seen around that?
I suppose from a LinkedIn marketing solution perspective, we work with partners, and obviously we work with API integrations with many of those partners. I kind of agree with you. I mean, to me, it's all about use cases. Kind of being very, very specific about what the use case is, what the spec is, and then obviously thinking about how the technology is going to solve that particular problem, that particular challenge within the organisation, how it integrates potentially with the other technology that you're utilising. I think we did a big piece of research, talking about tech buyers and kind of decision makers. Kind of, as you say, it's a buying committee. Yes, procurement, finance, sales, marketing are all involved, but the end user is increasingly involved in that decision. So you need to think about how do you connect with all of those in terms of persuading them that you are a reputable brand, but also at the right cost. And those are the two things at the moment, both reputation and trust and price, that are key drivers of decision making. I think I agree with you. It is about defining the use case, but that decision can take a long time to persuade people that you are the right technology for them in terms of meeting their needs.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. It brings me to kind of data strategy, actually, because how does that tie into one's data strategy and organisation? Of course, these things take time. When it comes to building that data strategy, I think it comes from the leadership within an organisation of setting the tone of, okay, this is going to be the strategy. I need to live and breathe it via the communication, the technology that's being used. It needs to be seen to be used at the very, very top for it to filter down across the organisation. In your experience, when it comes to selecting technology and then tying that in with building a data strategy, how do you see those two things fitting in and then going on to build a wider strategy?
I suppose to me a data strategy is about how do you create and maintain a strategy across the business. To me, there's kind of really 4 areas for a data strategy. First is actionability. Obviously, that you can use that data to inform decisions. The second is relevance, so ensuring it's contextually relevant to the organisation and the category you play in. The third is really thinking about evolution, so continue updating your strategy. And finally, it's about integration and connectivity. So integration across the organisation, so thinking about a business-wide strategy and obviously how it's connecting to the organisation, importantly, driving change. I suppose from a marketing perspective, data strategy is super important these days. Thinking about who are the audiences, high propensity audiences, going to drive long-term sustainable value for the company. Thinking, as you said earlier, about how you better connect with those audiences. And importantly, how do you measure? How do you measure success? That's one of the biggest things we're seeing at the moment. The conversations are around how do you inform success? And I think that is a critical part of your data strategy. Have you got the right data in place to really inform measurement and attribution for your marketing investment?
It ties in nicely with actually how you build a culture within an organisation as well, because when you're living and breathing a data strategy, that's going to dictate the type of organisation that you kind of work within. And when you're thinking about building cultures within organisations, I think leadership, once again, is quite important to that end. It feels like to me when we've got an overarching goal or something to achieve, which is, again, part of that data strategy, I feel like leadership teams need to allow the teams that work underneath them to independently get to those goals however they see fit. And I think that autonomy allows for a more positive culture to be built, but it also fosters innovation. I think innovation and culture almost go hand in hand to live and breathe together, to be working in a place that is seen as a positive environment. You can't slap a logo on a screen and say, this will be our culture. Of course, it needs to be organic. And I think if you have that data strategy in place that everyone can kind of collectively work towards within an organisation, if that's kind of organically done in an innovative way, then you can live and breathe a really, really positive culture. But how do you see culture being built internally here at LinkedIn?
I suppose outside of data, I think, culture is super important to LinkedIn. I think, to your point, culture doesn't exist on words on a wall. When I've been in various organisations and been into companies, I've seen lots of words to say this is our culture. To me, it's all about a sense of belonging, a sense of being part of an organisation. And obviously, data plays a key part of our organisation. I think the big change is we've seen analytics be part of multiple parts of the company. Rather than being a back end, working with tech teams, we now see analytics being very much part of decision making. And we're seeing it play a key role, not just in my world of insights, but very much part of sales decisions, commercial decisions, in terms of where the opportunity for growth. I think if you look at analytics skill sets, massively in demand. In 2023, it was the top 10 demanded skill set. So for me, if you're into analytics, massive opportunity for growth and development in your career. If you're new to thinking about your future career, I'd say analytics is a great place to be.
That's really super interesting to hear, because you talked about different teams and what they kind of needed, and how collaboratively, with data, without data, how it works, builds a kind of organic culture. And when we think about great collaborative uses of data, I'm going to bring in one of the case studies that we actually have at Verity. The Philadelphia 76ers, a basketball team in the US, utilised our product. And of course, they saved copious amounts of time. However, one of the things they used the data for was predictive stadium attendance for game days. And whilst the marketing teams and the data teams that are pulling that data and analysing it are bringing that to the fore in the back office, that can be translated all the way down to the hot dog stand within the stadium itself. And so that really is a collaborative and collective use of data across the business that I just think is a great advert for the way that a business should run. I just want to see if you've got some examples that you could talk to me about in the way that you guys have helped out some organisations.
My role in terms of how do we unlock the value of our data, I think absolutely I agree. Data plays a key role, and as an organisation, it's central to our success and central to the future in terms of where we're going. The one thing I would say is, how do you talk about data? And I think having a culture is fantastic, but I think for us it's how do you humanise data? Our goal is to really, as I said, drive our customers' goals. How do we meet those goals? And obviously our customers are people. They have human needs, they have human goals, and increasingly it's connecting with them on an emotional level. When I think about what I have to do and what my team does, obviously we produce research and insights, but But ultimately, we're trying to change action. We're trying to change behavior. We're trying to help people make better decisions, where to invest, understand preferences, understand how brands really inform people's decisions for the future. So to me, it's really important how do you connect that story with people. You think about, okay, what we do, but actually to me, it's in part about decision science rather than data science. We're trying to inform people's decisions, and part of those decisions are driven by emotion.
Yeah.
I think it's those stories that are really important. And I think building data stories and creating emotional provocation is kind of how you can really drive change. And so to us, data storytelling is super important.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we truly believe is going to drive fundamental influence and change in organizations in the future.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. We spoke to one of our clients a couple of months ago, and they mentioned that they've got a very kind of data experimental culture. They really want to ensure that they're not just pulling out the new to market technology and slapping that on a PowerPoint deck and presenting that externally. They really want to know what that data can unearth. And as you mentioned about humanizing that element and really living and breathing behind those examples. But moving through to insights on a more humanized basis, as you kind of mentioned. If we think about how you can unlock opportunities or provoke thought leadership, for me, it always feels like selecting best-in-class products is obviously a part of the process, but combined with time, invariably that would equate to success. So you can't always control the best-in-class element because there are other people involved. The time element is something that any one business can control. How do you think that translates into the kind of the day-to-day running of the business over at LinkedIn? From
your perspective and what you've said, experiments to me are really important. Creating a culture of experimentation, I think, is super important in any organisation. But also the other side of that is thinking about more time series level data. So time series, particularly in the context of marketing mixed models, to really understand causality and incrementality in terms of what actually, within the context of all those marketing levers you can pull, is going to fundamentally drive sales.
You spoke about real-time data there. And maybe slightly controversially, I think that it's rarely, if ever, required in this world. I appreciate that for a snapshot view, it's brilliant as you want to know what's going on right now within my campaign or strategy. Real-time data feels to me the opposite extreme of an econometric study. And so I think that somewhere in between those semi-regular tweaks and changes are essentially what's required to really eke out the value of a campaign. But what is your view on real-time data and where do you think it has a place within the industry?
As I said, I think it's got a place in terms of particularly around the algorithms and kind of how they work, and real-time data is allowing you to identify the audiences and allowing you to inform the bid in terms of who you want to go after. I also kind of agree, looking over a longer period of time, you can see patterns and trends in the data. That's super important in terms of understanding opportunities. Absolutely for us, when we're helping our clients thinking about future strategies, future sustainable strategies, certainly we're thinking about some of those trends and how they play out, and even predicting off the top of those trends, say, okay, what does the future look like? How do we predict using that longer term data to predict what the future could be, and obviously importantly, what that would drive for them in terms of business results. No conversation could go without talking about AI at some level. I think what we are going to see, I suppose, amazingly is the disruption of all industries. What are your thoughts in terms of Gen AI integration within the world of technology?
Well, it's a really interesting conversation. There's so many people that are rethinking the degrees they're going to go and study at university or the courses they're going to take, because can AI provide them the solutions they need to get into the world of work faster? That's definitely a conversation. And if you're thinking about the skills that any organisation within the media industry requires, it's that hunger and thirst of where can I get the knowledge quickest. That's the way that you adapt and stay ahead of the curve. And so long as people have that mindset and ethos, it doesn't matter where they've collected that information to a degree, but so long as they're staying up to date with that stuff, whether it is using AI, but hopefully not solely AI to get to their conclusions, I think they'll stay ahead of the curve. Having AI is going to work for sure, but it needs to come from trusted places for it to really land. We're coming towards the end of the conversation, I think, around where we wanted to take you on a journey for David. But there's one element that I do want to cover, and it's a piece of advice that you would give anyone that's listening to this conversation. I'll go first, because I think you'll know what I'm going to say. It's going to be time. That's the thing that I've mentioned throughout this conversation, making sure that there is enough time for those data experiments to take place. We spoke about the fact that those hasty changes don't necessarily inform the strategy for longer periods, and that is the one takeaway from my perspective. But from yourself, David, what would you say is the one piece of advice you'd give to anyone listening?
I think the critical thing is to think about the use case, to think about the data and what are you trying to achieve. To me, defining the right data is kind of really important, whether that's internal data or whether it's something to go externally. That to me is absolutely critical. Obviously having the analytic capabilities around that I think is super important. But fundamentally what we're there to do is try and change behaviour. So how do you turn all of that, how do you unlock the power of that data, how do you generate insights, and fundamentally how do you change behaviour? To me it's all about informing decisions. How do you make better decisions about the future to drive sustainable growth for your company?
Thanks so much for having joined us for episode 2, David. Really, really appreciate your thoughts and your comments.
Thank you very much indeed for inviting me. It's been great to discuss what I think is a super important subject, for both obviously the industry and marketing alike.
And thank you to everyone else who's also been listening to this episode. Please visit adverity.com for any supporting materials, as well as the signpost to the next episode. Also, feel free to connect to David and I on LinkedIn. We'd be more than happy to have a conversation with you.